啊表哥倒酒喝，啊表妹倒酒喝，啊表哥喜欢不喜欢也要喝。
大家好. It's a very unusual podcast, and I think for a lot of listeners, it's going to be a kind of shock to hear me speaking in English. But it's the first time that the Laowaicast is doing podcasting in English, and the reason is because we have a very, very interesting guest today. Well, every week we have interesting guests, but today is the special guest. It's Andrew Methven, connecting Beijing to London. So we have now this very unusual connection. And he is the author of the Slow Chinese, which I have subscribed in, let me see, I did it in April 2021. It's a newsletter, and it's really a perfect source of all things related to the Chinese slang, the Chinese vocabulary, the phrases, the 成语, everything is there. So, Andrew, welcome to Laowaicast.
Albert, thanks for having me. And I'm glad to be your first English language recording. It's an honor.
Right. And I certainly hope that you are the first and not the last. So I think it's a time for us to expand a little bit in scope. And because Laowaicast is related to everything that people want to know about China. So I hope that certainly we'll have broader audience of people who cannot speak Russian language, but they can speak and understand English language. So, Andrew, again, thank you very much for making this wonderful, I really would love to emphasize, wonderful newsletter, which is coming to my mailbox once per week. And hence is the first question. How did you decide to do this newsletter?
First of all, it's great you've been reading it for so long. So I started it in February 2021. So nearly 100 weeks ago. I think this week is week 96. And the main reason I started it was just for me to keep my Chinese language skills going, because obviously during COVID, it's been really hard to get to China. I haven't been there since November 2019. And I just found that during lockdown, because I'm not in China, my language was getting worse. And also it was really hard. I found it really hard to keep up with news coming out of China, because before I would maybe go there every few months, 2-3 months. And so it was really the main beneficiary actually to begin with was just me, because I was doing it to force myself or build a habit of reading the news every day and then learning new words and phrases every day. And then what started as me publishing every Saturday morning to, I think I started with around 50 people, has just gradually grown, and it's changed a little bit. But at the core, it's helping me and also the people that read it maintain their Chinese language, improve and learn new things, and then also stay on top of stay on top of new and interesting language trends and kind of learn new internet slang and things like that.
I wonder actually why nobody did it before, because if you look at the newsletter, it's so great that you have there all the words and then the short phrases, then you have the 成语, and then you have a lot of examples actually coming, as far as I can see, they're coming from real news and from some articles that probably you find on the WeChat, or you will tell me the source. So I just wonder, before you started, did you see anybody doing something similar?
No, I didn't actually. And I didn't really think about what it was. It was just really me using the way that I learned Chinese. So I've always learnt it through finding interesting words and phrases, but then learning the whole piece of language that you find it in. So that's just how I've always learnt Chinese. And I guess I did it because there wasn't anything that did that. And so it was just really me writing it for me to begin with. I think that's the best way to put it.
And then I certainly can relate to what you said before, that you started it and you were the main beneficiary, because actually I did my thing in, let's say, even podcast is also a kind of extension of my early efforts to kind of teach Chinese, which I didn't really teach Chinese online, but I was also, gathering some phrases, some verses, some poetry, doing the translation. Actually, I did it with the same purpose of helping myself to master the language and then to keep it alive. So I certainly can relate to that. And my question now, because you're doing that job, I have to say, so great, how do you then recognize the meaning of a lot of new words that are appearing there? Because I'm actually reading any of your newsletters, of course, I can see some old Chinese phrases, some sayings that have 1,000 years of history, but then a lot of new slang. And so when you say it, how do you know what it means? Is anybody helping you with saying like, oh yeah, that's the meaning of this word?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think I find the hardest things to work out are either the really old ones that are used in a modern context. So some, an idiom or a phrase that could be thousands of years old, or like a really new one that's started online somewhere, maybe in a gaming chat room, and then it's grown and it's used on social media, and then maybe it changes. And so I think those two types of words and phrases are the hardest ones to work out. And sometimes, or often, particularly the old ones, they're actually a bit easier, because normally you have a Baidu, Baike page on them. So if you search online, it's like a Chinese equivalent of Wikipedia, Baidu Baike, and you can normally read into those and get an understanding of what they mean. Internet slang is more difficult. Often there isn't an authoritative source or an explanation. So part of it, I just have to research online and try and find other examples of it. Part of it, you just look at the context and try and work out what the person is trying to say. These are often things that are said on social media in comments against certain posts. So you have to try and just get a feel for what they're trying to say. And then as a backup, I do have, since last November, so nearly a year now, I've started working with an editor, Zoe Chen, who reviews all the work. She's a Chinese national, but very talented linguist. So she will always check everything that I do. And often I have to ask her to fully understand what's going on, because sometimes particularly these internet slang words can be quite confusing, and often they change as well. So what it was, so a good example actually is the English acronym PUA, P-U-A.
Okay.
So PUA is from the English pickup artist.
Okay.
And in Chinese, it originally meant something similar. So like basically kind of being harassed or trying to be picked up, like normally from a woman's point of view, be picked up by someone that you don't want to have anything to do with. But now that's evolved into something that more just means to be deceived or tricked. So if you are 被迫了, that means you're being 被骗了. To be deceived or be tricked. So things like that, where you look them up and the explanation is one thing, but then clearly when they're being used in a real situation, they could be sometimes a bit different. It's a mix of research, guessing, and then asking an expert as well.
One of the recent articles that I read in your newsletter, it was really funny for me, this new meaning of the word 润. Because basically, of course, when you see the character 润, it's to moisten, to flourish, right? And then it's funny because, of course, it's pinyin, the phonology of this character is R-U-N. So actually, it's, if you write pinyin, it's run. and then I really was kind of laughing that I also read your explanation that 润学, which is you translate it as runology. Okay, so that's a tricky part of the Chinese slang, as you said, that if you don't know it beforehand and you see it even in the context, but you cannot really make what it means. You have to do this kind of guessing and almost solving some riddles to get the meaning of the word.
Yeah, definitely. So run is also a good one. So that started to be used around, I think, April this year during the Shanghai lockdowns. And again, that changes. So to begin with, it's just used as run, a single phrase. And then it changes. So it's now people say run li or run chu, which means to, leave or exit. And so, things like that, when you first look at them, it's impossible to know what they mean. Yeah, because they make no sense. But then it's just a question of reading around it and trying to guess.
And here is the question. You mentioned that you have Zoe Chen who is helping you with editing. And I wonder if you discuss with her, for her as a Chinese national or as a person who grew up within the Chinese language environment, is it difficult for her to make out the new meanings of these slang words? Because I'm just trying to understand how it works for the native speaker who sees it for the first time. And also I kind of imagine I have to guess what's the meaning. And as also you said before, I guess it changes so fast because we have to say it. Okay, there is censorship in China, so people, I guess, they are trying to stay ahead in this game, catch and run, and then and then trying to invent the new meanings of the old characters. So I don't know if you discussed that with Zoe.
Yeah, so she is very good. So it's only very rarely where I come up with things that she's not come across before, but occasionally I do. And again, I think it's just a mix of guesswork and trying to understand the context of the whole sentence. And that's why in the newsletter I do include the full sentence, because you can only really properly understand something if it's in the full context. So yeah, it is. We do occasionally find things that we need to kind of double check. Definitely. And then also, as within the podcasts that we do, we added a feature which, from feedback to your point there, Albert, about the looking at this from a Chinese language or a mother tongue Chinese language person's point of view, and every week we take one or between one and two or three of the words that I learn, and then Zoe discusses it from her point of view. What do these mean from a Chinese language point of view? So that is a really interesting angle that we've found as we've been doing it.
Actually, you're coming to a very interesting point. I have to admit that I'm still a kind of free rider. I read your free weekly newsletter and I still haven't subscribed, but I will do it. I haven't subscribed to your new content. And yeah, because you now have the podcast, right? Tell us a little bit more about, like, if a new subscriber is subscribing to your newsletter. As I said, it's free, and so it's excellent source of information and inspiration. And I will, before we go to the podcast, I have to mention for my listeners another important point why I would really recommend everyone to subscribe to that newsletter, because actually, for us, we will be getting double benefit of it because we're not native speakers, and you have excellent English language translation there. So it's really like, for me, every time that I read it, I'm kind of getting double amount of information because I read it in Chinese and I read it in English. And so I will learn some new English idioms or phrases or even some slang. Okay, so that's a kind of a bit more advertisement for you. But it's not really advertisement. It's my it's my sincere appreciation of what you're doing. Right? Okay.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, Albert. Thank you.
So now let's go to the podcast and let's go to the content that you have besides your newsletter, because I know that you launched the Slow Chinese community, and please tell us a bit more about what you have there.
Sure. So the newsletter itself, as you said, is totally free. So in there. So the way I do it is I choose at the start of the week, I choose one news story that's not necessarily headline news, but it's relevant and it's happening at the moment. And it's interesting from a language point of view. And then I'll read into the story. So I'll read somewhere between 2 and 5 Chinese language articles about that particular issue. And then I'll just gather all the interesting words and phrases that I find, and then I'll try and put them into some kind of order. So, for example, the idioms used around a particular topic, they tend to be linked by something. So, for example, talking about workplace issues in China, or, you know, another good one is entrepreneurial companies, let's say, or like a sector in China that's very has really strong competition. Often the idioms that are used in that context are all about war or battles or fighting or something like that. So I'll try and connect the words that I find into some kind of theme, because I think that makes it easier to learn. And then the free version is published just basically a bunch of words, normally around 20, 25 words, organized in the order of useful words, 3-character phrases, idioms, and longer phrases. And so if you read that every week, the idea is that you can keep up to date with one particular topic related to China, and you can learn some new words related to that topic. And then the paid version, it's called a membership, is a subscription product where I take the content of the newsletter and I turn it into what I think is a really useful language learning resource. And so you get the same content in the newsletter for the paid version, but then you get audio, so you get that as a podcast. And then that is me essentially reading through the newsletter, but then also with Zoe doing a second half of that. So she discusses the news story from her point of view, looks at 2 or 3 of the interesting words. She'll then do the full word list in Chinese with example sentences, so you can listen to an audio, a native speaker, and how they would say, you know, everything that's in the newsletter. And then she'll also do a full recording of the main article that we look at. So then you get, normally every week, the podcast is around 50 minutes, and about half of that is native Chinese language. Yeah, so that's the podcast. Then there's downloads that I do, so Pleco download, Scritter, and then a word list and example sentences download. And then finally the community element, which we've just started to do, where we do like a monthly meetup and Q&A. And I'm trying to build that element a bit more, and it's just slowly starting to grow. So you get 3 extra things: audio, resources, and community for the paid version.
Actually, you just mentioned one thing, and I think it's important for my listeners, because a lot of people in Russia or Russian-speaking communities, when they learn Chinese, they use Pleco, these online. Well, it's not online; it's the APP dictionary, and it's great that you're also preparing these words and phrases for Pleco, because then you can download it and upload it into your Pleco dictionary, and then have it at the palm of your hand, right, with your smartphone or tablet.
Yeah, because often the things that we do aren't in the dictionary. That's kind of a thing that I like to try and do, is that what you read in the newsletter is really current, and also you probably won't learn it in a textbook, and you might not even find it properly explained in a dictionary. So that's why we do the Pleco and the Scritter lists every week.
Great. So yeah, definitely I will subscribe, and I will also start getting my Pleco downloads, and I will start listening to your podcast, because truly, I remember that one of the greatest sources of, let's say, live Chinese conversation, words, pronunciation, and how you build the phrases. For me, if you remember, there was a podcast that was called Chinese Pod. So that was yes. I think 10 years ago. I don't know actually if they're still doing their podcasting or not, but that was great. So I look forward to listening to your podcast and learning a lot of new things. For today, I have one more question. It's not so much about the newsletter, or not so much about the content that you have there. It's a question that just came to my mind. Then you mentioned that you were doing this podcast with Zoe, and that the whole thing actually is to keep your Chinese language skills from getting rusty. So my question is, when you speak in Chinese language, do you feel yourself like a little bit different person? I will elaborate why I'm asking this question, because it's a very unusual experience for me to record the podcast in English. So I certainly feel myself a little bit different. It's like putting totally different set of clothes, for example. Every time that I go into the extended conversation in Chinese, then I'm, fully immersed in, negotiation or some conversation, whatever, in Chinese language, I also feel myself a bit different person. And I don't know if it happens to you too.
It's a really good question, Albert. I do, actually. Obviously, because I've not been to China for now nearly 3 years, when I'm doing the podcast, I don't feel that different. But in real life situations in China, I do actually feel quite different. I think I feel a bit more confident, actually, in Chinese, because, when you... In Chinese settings, particularly as you were saying in kind of negotiations or more like formal settings, there are so many rules or rituals that apply in terms of how you're supposed to communicate or behave. But because I'm a foreigner, I always feel that if I want to, the rules can a little bit not so much apply to me. And so, not that I go around breaking rules particularly, but I think just that feeling of you're always a bit different, for me, actually makes me feel a bit more confident in Chinese than perhaps I would be in English in the same kind of situation. And so it's always being like a little bit removed from the setting in a way. So yeah, I would say I probably feel a bit more confident because it just inevitably you're just always a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. Actually, I share the feeling because in Chinese language, when you speak, then you're immersed in that environment. What you mentioned is true. It's not so much about breaking the rules. It's a little bit about bending the rules, maybe to your advantage, or definitely I also feel myself a bit more comfortable. And actually, what I really enjoy is not so much translating. That's probably hard part. And you're just trying to translate somebody into Chinese or from Chinese to other language. I love more actually the role of interpreting. Then you have a relative freedom to rephrase, to say it with different words, to say it with different sentences, but basically to make sure that both parties, they understand the intentions of each other. So that's an interesting part of this multilingual environment and multilingual communication.
Yeah, I think it's really, I would agree, the interpreting thing. So I wouldn't say I'm like a proper or a professional standard interpreter, but when you're in a situation where you have to try and get, two people or however many people to understand what's going on, there is an element of art about doing that, and how you try and explain stuff, and you have to I really enjoy that bit too, because you have to just react. There's no way you can't think about it, and so you do have to just often. So taking some of the language that we do in the newsletter, actually quite a lot of it is just about feeling. And getting the right feeling for something, and so I really enjoy that too, because you have to be quite creative and in the moment and very quick. Whereas translation for me is so boring because you're just in the words on the page.
I hope that in the future we'll have a chance to record another podcast, maybe talking more about translation, interpreting, and these things, because certainly I have a good experience of actually using, let's say, 3 or 4 languages for translation, because I'm lucky I can speak, besides Chinese, I can speak English and Spanish, and then Russian, my mother tongue. So that's another topic for another podcast.
Yeah, sure.
To compare the feelings of you. Linguistic persona when you speak in different languages, and then you're doing the translation or interpreting for different cultures. That's really, really fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Andrew, thank you very much for your time. And thank you again for doing this Slow Chinese newsletter and now having all this community and the podcast and everything. So it's really great that you're doing that. I will post all the links to your newsletter, to your Instagram account. I will see all the links that are useful for our listeners. But if somebody is listening and you don't see the show notes, you can always Google Slow Chinese. It's mailto Methven.
Yeah.
You will find it, I think, on Google, and then you can subscribe easily and get your weekly newsletter full of really, really useful Chinese vocabulary. And the most important, to emphasize again, it's always about topics that are now trending, that are now hot, that are now important in the Chinese society. That's another great point. So we're not talking about just some vocabulary lists. It's something that you can use every day. You get in your newsletter today, and then the same day, the next day, you can surprise your Chinese friends with your new slang phrases, or that they will say, "Oh, how do you know that?" It's also another interesting feeling than you're trying to show off, right? That you know some Chinese slang.
Yeah, it is about a little bit. It is about if someone can read it and then use one of the phrases and really impress the people they're talking to, then that's a big win for me. That's kind of the purpose of doing it.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are doing that. I'm sure. I'm one of them. Okay, Andrew, thank you for creating this opportunity for me to record the podcast in English. So it was kind of challenge for me. As always, then you listen to your voice, then it's recorded, you kind of surprised. And I know that I will listen to my voice in English language and I will say, it sounds really strange and cringy. I'm sure I will say I don't like it, but I hope that for our listeners who've been listening for our podcast since 2009, that comes as a nice surprise. And also, dear listeners, if you know anybody who would like to be a guest, English language guest, in the Laowaicast in English version, please do write to me. My email is very simple. It's we@laowaicast.ru. So please drop me an email and recommend the next English speaking guest for the Laowaicast in English. All right. Andrew, have a very nice day in London. We are 8 hours difference, right?
I think we are, yeah. It's just coming up to 7 a.m. Time to get up.
Okay.
Albert, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. It's been really great to talk to you. And your English is fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. It's I still have to practice more. So maybe again, I will use the same trick. Maybe recording in English will help me to improve my English language skills. And then actually I have to follow in your footsteps, and I have to do some podcast in Chinese language as well, because until now I'm a bit this phrase. I will probably put it as a phrase of the podcast. 叶公好龙, this saying about Mr. Ye who loves the dragon. Then the dragon comes to his house. He's scared. So I'm a bit scared of recording the podcast in Chinese language. But one of these days, I definitely have to do it, because I have to practice what I preach. Let's say. Yeah,
that's a new idiom on me, Albert. Actually, see, there's so many words you just can't run out of new stuff to learn in Chinese. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's say goodbye to our listeners. I will put some music later for the final part of the podcast. So if you have any particular Chinese song that you like, then maybe you just write to me which track should I put at the end of the podcast, and let's say goodbye to our listeners.
Thank you, Albert. And it's great to meet you and hopefully connect with some of your listeners.
I'm sure that a lot of people will subscribe to your newsletter. So if you will see a lot of subscribers with some Cyrillic or Slavic names, then you know where they are coming from. Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
几句三日月沧桑尽变幻，那是多少红颜换一声长叹。谁曾巨鹿踏破了秦关，千里兵戈血染，终究也不过是风轻云淡。长枪策马平天下，此番诀别却为难。一身玉兮玉兮，泪眼已潸然。与君共饮这杯中冷暖，西风彻夜回吹不断。醉里挑灯看见且无阑珊，台下一曲离乱，出歌声四方。安悲此君饮剑，雪落凝寒霜。难舍一段过往，愿今又何妨？与你魂归之处，便是苍茫。长枪策马平天下，此番诀别却为难。一身玉兮玉兮，泪眼已潸然。与君共饮这杯中冷暖，西风彻夜回吹不断。醉里挑灯看见且无